So Florence, it's good to see you. Thank you for talking to us for Black History Month. So this is Florence Nyasamo, and do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Florence Nyasamo, and I'm, as I say, the founder of Lives of Color. Florence actually, been involved in doing Black History Month. This is the 7th year we've been hosting Black History Month in Gloucestershire. So yeah.
Yeah, so you kind of been leading Black History Month in Gloucestershire for quite a while now, right? So it's cool.
It's been a long journey, and I remember when we first started, most people believed that it would be 2 years and then that would be the end of it. It's one of those things that I thought, no, it can't be, this fashion that comes that 2, 3 years and that's the end of it. So I'm really pleased that we've been able to get it going for 7 years now.
Yeah, that's really cool. So Black History Month at Bath Spa is kind of, we're partnering with some of our American universities as well, and their Black History Month is in February. So we're kind of having a whole bunch of events in October, which your talk is part of, or our discussion is part of, and then we're going to have some more stuff in February. So that's something to talk about a little bit later. So let's start by talking about you. Tell us what you do, Lives of Colour, Black History Month, Gloucestershire. Tell us about what it is you do.
Oh, well, just to give you a little bit of background, how I came to be doing Black History Month. What's happened, this is, sometimes things happen unconsciously and you really don't know what's happening at that point. But I remember when I was doing my studies in politics and community development, just being curious about how come there's no visibility, there's nothing really in Cheltenham where I lived that is embracing the Black experience. And at the point, I really didn't know what I was, what it was that I was looking for. So I just did my course. I thought, okay, fantastic. And then, but this question came back again. And I'm thinking about it, how come? And one of the things that brought it really together is when I was interviewing for my Community Cohesion dissertation that I did. And what was quite interesting, looking at, because I looked at what was happening in Bradford and what was happening in Birmingham, and relating it to what was happening in Cheltenham where I lived. And there was quite a lot happening up there and hardly anything happening in Cheltenham. And I remember, I can't remember who exactly I asked the question. And I did ask the question about, what is there any, Africa Caribbean organizations in Cheltenham at the point? And the answer that I received that, oh no, that is in Gloucester. And I felt like, okay, something is quite missing here. And for that reason, I think it got me to this journey of having to do something and making the Black community sort of visible in Gloucestershire or Cheltenham for that matter.
Yeah, and so for those people watching, Cheltenham and Gloucester are about 10 miles away, but they're very different socio-economically and socio-demographically, aren't they?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I hadn't been to Gloucester as much as I've been in the last sort of, let's say, 3 years, no, 4 years when I've been involved with hosting events to increase the number, within Black History Month, when we've had worked with Strike a Line to get the community, the BEM community, really engaged with the events that were focused really for them. So that has been an education for me as well. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. And so tell me a bit more about Lives of Colour. What is it that you and your organization does?
Lives of Colour was set up in the back of Black history because one of the things that I found out when researching and when I was talking to people about Black history was that some people felt that they didn't feel belonging to Black history, or Black history was limiting just to 1 month, or Black history, make some people felt that it was too political for them. So I felt, okay, I went on a journey to research and find out, okay, how do we then make people, we have a platform that is more inclusive. And we founded Lives of Color 2 years ago. And the aim of Lives of Color is really to elevate the voices of marginalized communities. And this is from the individual, from the community and organization level. And we do this using our grades inclusion strategy. For us, grades means gender, religion, age, disability, ethnicity, and sexual orientation. So ensuring that all these people within this community have their voices heard and that is visible out. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I can see the poster in the background. What's Authors of Colour? Tell us about Authors of Colour.
Authors of Colour came about because after a long time trying to get into school, I didn't want to get into what I found out, that there was a lack of representation of books that kids felt represented in school. I mean, it was heartbreaking when I was researching to hear one of the young people say that I went through school, there was nothing about me in school, including the books. So I decided to research what can I do to solve this problem. So we curated a list of books for schools, which is from year 1 to year 10. So all the way to secondary school. And it's very interesting. This morning, I've just read that Penguin have launched an initiative which is called Lit in Color, to ensure that there's books, literature, that GCSE level, that kids, diverse books, diverse voices that people can see, can read as well. So, yeah.
That's really cool. And I guess with the literature, when you think of school, kind of the only literature which has a strong kind of Black cast of members in the book are things that are kind of related to the civil rights movement and slavery, and that's it. That's kind of where it ends, right?
And that's exactly why I didn't want to go into a school, do Black history, and it's got the notion of slavery, it's got the notion of civil rights, because it brings you this idea of contention of, why can't we just be ourselves? We also have our stories. I was asked to speak at an event with the Gloucestershire History Association, and I had to research about the Black community in Gloucestershire. And I remember going to the Gloucestershire archives to just find the stories of Black people, which, should be normal. And I was really surprised that, this is, the archives trying to find stories so that I can, connect with with the presentation I was going to do. There was hardly any. What in the 20th century and coming on to to the present, it's very rare that all I could find is, okay, when people got married, when people died, when people got but there was nothing in between. And it's for that reason I set out to do our I Migrate exhibition that is still showing in Museum of Gloucester until the end of this month.
Cool. Okay, so there's a couple of questions. I'll come back to the I Migrate thing because that sounds really interesting. But how do you kind of envision your Authors of Colour and your reading list and your referencing list? How do you envision that being used in school, and what use would it be for? Yeah, what use would it be?
Okay, that's a very interesting question, because one of our trustees, who's a marketeer, just sent something to me, and it's like the books that kids read in school now. Pippa, Kip, and Chip. Do you know anybody named Pippa, Kip, and Chip? Come on, let's be real. Our books are to bring real people, real lives, real stories that are relatable to the diverse communities. So we are bringing, making sure that the classroom is inclusive, and the child, there's an aspect of a teacher talking about differences, but there's an aspect of a child just picking a book and thinking, oh, I want to know about this, or this person looks like me, I want to read these books from the point of view what is it that is going on in that story that I can relate to. At the moment in the UK, only 1% of books that were of children books that were published in 2017 had a person in the UK had a person of color as a protagonist. So what does that mean? If you come from a diverse community, does it mean that you can't lead? Does it mean that you can't identify with leadership or success? And if we can't put these images in our children now, so when? That is my question. And that's why authors of color is very important for schools.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So related to that, in what you were just discussing, so the I Migrate exhibition in a museum of Gloucester?
Yeah, Museum of Gloucester has been there since February, which has been fantastic. I don't think if it wasn't for COVID, we'd have had that long of time. But yes, it was. It was really to give the story and give pride to the community of Gloucester. That's what I felt I was doing, and more so, it's not just Gloucester. It was about the Windrush generation. Because these are people who came here from the 50s. I mean, listen to some of their stories and have experience. Some have had fantastic experience, and some have had really horrific experience, and how they've overcome those barriers. And now they are as the elders, the Black elders community in Gloucester. And it was really, for me, important that they're portrayed in a way that, for them, I mean, they'd never seen themselves portrayed as that, to have their portraits, to have their stories, and then on top of it, to have audio. So you could stand in front of a picture, scan the code, and listen to that person's voice. They've never had such a thing happen in Gloucester. And they were really proud of the work that was done.
Yeah, it's really cool. I'm taking my daughter next week, actually. So we're looking forward to taking Eva next week. So we're looking forward to seeing it. How did you develop it? How was it an idea that came about, and who did you work with? Kind of, yeah. How did it come about?
I mean, it came about as I just mentioned before. One of the things that I felt there was a gap. There was nothing. The stories of the diverse communities were missing as a whole. And so I worked with, I spoke to the photography department, Dr. Peck, Julia Peck at the University of Gloucestershire. And we went on a journey doing stories. The first year, which was in 2017, the stories were done, but was from the students led it. And yes, we were, a few people had their story shared, but I wanted, I felt like, the community needed to lead the story so that it's not compacted into an academic sort of program. So, and this gave us the freedom to work with two photojournalism students, which is Naomi and Miriam, who I worked with. So we got the community members come forward and got interviewed and then had their portraits taken.
That's really cool. So you said it ends at the end of the month. 31st of October, yeah. So are you going to do like a walk around where you film the exhibition and that kind of thing before it's over? So similar to what we were lucky enough to have an academic from the University of West England, Dr. Sean Sobers, do a walk around Fairfield House where Haile Selassie was based in the 40s when he was exiled from Africa. Is that the kind of thing you could do just to keep it alive and keep it going? I mean, yeah, I'd want to keep it alive. I mean, I'm hoping, it's out of this. I was approached by two young women from the Asian community in Gloucester, and they want to do an Asian I Migrate. So for me, it's an exciting thing. I'm just waiting to find out whether that gets a go-ahead. To add to that, the I Migrate that we've done with the Windrush generation and the African diaspora, so that is a collective that can go around other museums, so that all these stories are shared. Is about keeping it alive, keeping the conversation, and really
all the community, our society, understanding the difference and what are the barriers and what are the challenges that diverse community do face.
Okay. So it's Black History Month. It's currently Sunday, the 25th of October. So we're nearly at the end of October. And so when we think about Black History Month, we think, you know, Black history is British history and vice versa. And, you know, Black history should be taught alongside white British history. So tell me a little bit about your thoughts around Black history within the UK and within education, how it's taught and how it's thought about.
Well, for me, that's a very, you know, I don't know how to answer that, because it's one of those things. I grew up in Kenya, and having grown in Kenya, I learned British history. But to complement that, I had the advantage whereby we had our oral stories, our grandmothers, our uncles telling us the oral stories of our lives. And for that, it complemented the two. I was really surprised. I mean, I know I read how the Black history, the background of Black history came about in the 80s after the riots that happened all over the country. And is it Linda Bello took that on in the back of that and started Black history in London. And I read, you know, Benjamin Zephaniah saying that there was hardly any Black history in, you know, when he grew up. This is in the 80s, and we're still having the same conversation now. Come on, something is not quite right. How are kids who come from diverse communities, how are they meant to relate, identify themselves? I grew up knowing where I came from, the tribe I came from. I grew up knowing I'm a Kenyan. Actually, it was really confusing to come here, to find that, to live here, to find that I have to identify as an African, because Africa is not a country. So very confusing times. But, you know, Black history is about really the colonialism and the imperialism should be taught at school in order to bring the history that is missing. Because I think that is the aspect. So long as that is brought together, then we shouldn't worry about Black history, because it's the distortion whereby there's this gap of history that's not being taught. That's why, you know, then we have to find a way to tell our stories. But how do you tell people stories if there's a gap that is missing? Is one thing saying, oh, why are migrants, you know, risking their lives coming over, crossing the oceans? But if you understood the history, the imperial history, if you understood the colonial history, then you should really engage with that conversation without any problem.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And, you know, Black history kind of goes back, in the UK, goes back tens of thousands of years, right? So the first complete skeleton that was found in Cheddar Gorge, just what, an hour from here, from Cheltenham, was genetically found to be of a dark-skinned person, dark skin, blue-eyed, curly hair. So yeah, I mean, Black history is entwined within British history, and so I think it should be taught, like you say. So who in Black history inspires you? Now, when people say this, a lot of people think kind of standard go-tos like Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Harriet Tubman, whoever, but it doesn't have to be a famous person, right? Is there somebody in your family that kind of really inspires you? So who in Black history inspires you?
For me, to be I think the history, you know, the Black history that inspires me is quite confusing. Being that I was brought up in Kenya, I've lived here in London, and trying to understand, you know, my history, because my history is not just one history; it's a mixture of so many things. Growing up in Kenya, as I've mentioned, my dad was here in the UK. Studying theology. And then that meant that when he came back, we had a lot of volunteers coming back to Kenya, living with us. And, you know, so my history generally is so, you know, the idea of whiteness, the idea of, is so mixed up, because I don't see the other, well, people say you don't see, but until I came to live in the UK, I didn't understand there's the issue of one or the other. But the person who inspired me, and his work has inspired me so much, is my dad, actually. So, if he didn't do and empower his community the way he did, I don't think I'll be doing what I'm doing today.
Yeah, that's really cool. I think, yeah, so there were a few things that you touched on there. I think the person that inspires you, that's really interesting. And I think similar to you, the two people that really inspire me are my two granddads, my two grandparents. So one from the Windrush generation, came over in the 50s, etc., and the other kind of really typical working class white Londoner, and together they kind of seem so different in their backgrounds, but they're both so inspirational in their own way that it's fantastic. So you kind of, it's an interesting thing that you just mentioned, and that kind of, that you found it hard to get around knowing and understanding that there was a separation, like Black people and white people. Expand on that.
Yes, that for me, that was, having grown up in Kenya, being brought up, very confident, being told that I could do anything I want to do, being, for me, there was nothing that was impossible. You just had to go there and find it and do it. So coming to live here, I was also lucky enough working with an organization at first that was very inclusive in that way. So for a long time, I didn't feel any difference. It's not until I came to live in Gloucestershire that you start noticing things. And I'm just thinking, oh, what is that all about? And understanding this idea of otherness, and understanding that actually you just, nothing is as straightforward, which was the first time I had ever experienced the idea of, you can't do. And I'm just thinking, why can't I do? And that is something I think, especially with diverse communities, kids who are grown up within that area, and unless you have a family that is strong and reassures you constantly, then you can fall back thinking, being unsure about yourself, your identity, the idea of identity, who you are. And for me, that is really a really big issue, and to ensure that the next generation of young people grow up knowing themselves, knowing they can do, knowing their identity, really being confident and saying, this is who I am and I can do whatever I want. And that's one of the reasons that I do the work that I do.
That is really interesting that you say that. And we had Sado Jirda, that from the Black Southwest Network, do a kind of Q&A with us last week. And her reflections on moving from Africa to the UK are very similar to yours. So in her upbringing, it was kind of, you can do and you can be anything. And then you come to the UK and it's almost, you need to know your place.
That's what I've always struggled with that idea, knowing my place. What is my place? My place is the place I choose for myself. It's not somebody else to decide what my place is. And I've always been able, I always just go and ask, because my worst case scenario is like I can get a no. But if I get a no, I didn't have it in the first place, so I haven't lost anything. So that has always been an issue, this knowing your place. What is my place? As far as I'm aware, my place is where I choose to be. And that means I have to ask questions. And if I ask questions, it's answered or it's not answered, then I have to find a way of asking that question properly, or a way around it, so that I get the answer that I feel is where I want to go. And I don't understand this concept of, knowing your place. What is it about? Come on, you tell me, you've grown here. You tell me about this.
I wish I knew it. Do you know what? I, as a kind of mixed race British person, I didn't reflect on that being an issue until I moved to university, until I moved to Cheltenham, where it's kind of predominantly white and stuff. So I don't know the answer. I don't know what the whole thing is about know your place, because I think it should be that if you're talented enough and you're smart enough and you work hard enough, then you should be able to get places. But actually, we know from the workplace and health and education and so many other areas that it just doesn't work like that. It just doesn't work like that.
I mean, I was shocked, I was speaking, being that the work I do, you get to hear a lot about from people and their experiences. And I was speaking to this young man who, was having a review at work. And one of the things he was telling his sort of senior boss, who's not the line manager, is, oh, I can do this, just really trying to show how his capability. And even before he got back to his, where his area of work, his line manager had been informed about what he was saying. And then his line manager turned to him and saying, who do you think you are? I've been in this job for 30 years. Are you trying to take my job or something? I mean, with such experiences, then how can somebody thrive? So it's like, and then his conclusion is like, okay, I need to pay my bills. This idea of aspirations then does not exist. And that is most of the experiences of people from diverse communities. And, having to live with no, your aspirations. You don't have aspirations. You don't have, and yet, you are capable to do all these things, which is really sad. And we can't let the next generation of people grow up in such an environment.
Yeah, and eventually there's quite a bit of research around this, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So whether you're at school and you have a teacher who doesn't look like you or who doesn't reflect your culture, or that's a self-fulfilling prophecy in itself. If you're at work and you're told that in your first job, then eventually it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, and you kind of settle into the areas that you're told you should be in. Whereas we know that there is so much more potential for people. But I think a lot of people would say, not people that I agree with, but a lot of people would say that actually there's no evidence that that's due to race or that's due to prejudice. But there is a lot of such evidence, right? So you think about how things haven't really gone that far. Things haven't really changed that much because, as an example, in Cheltenham, where we live, we had the councillor a few months ago who decided it was a good word to say the N-word in a council meeting. So have things changed, or have they changed for the better? I think they've changed. I think they've changed in terms of how prejudice is acted upon.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, have things changed?
Personally, I don't think things have changed, because I'm just speaking from the perspective of somebody who's lived in this country for the last 30 years. If you're telling me that all these BLM and everything events were happening in the 80s and we are reliving them now, I mean, what has changed? Personally, from my point of view, the thing that has changed, yes, laws have been passed, but whether we've got the equality 2010, but as the infrastructure being sorted, that the education, the people who are making decisions really understand what the issues and what the problems are. I think, personally, I think that is what is missing, because the same people are still making the decision. The same people are still influencing policy. The same people don't understand difference. The idea of different thoughts and different minds coming round the table is hardly ever had. So how can things change if the people making decisions for the rest of the population are still the same?
Yeah, and it's a lot less. I think it's changed in terms of it's a lot less walking down the street and people shouting racist abuse at you, but you can see it in a lot of society. So when you think about, wasn't it just last week that we had, was it the 4 women that hosted Loose Women and got a whole bunch of people sending in complaints about it? The Britain's Got Talent dance had 25,000 complaints.
No.
The host of Question of Sport changed from a white lady to a mixed race lady, and all of these things are in my eyes, indicative of a lot of prejudice that people still have, and they are acceptable ways of demonstrating that prejudice. So in that way, for me, in that way, it's changed.
Yeah, it's changed but not changed, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's just people have changed behavior on how they, yeah, exactly. And those are very good examples, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, yeah.
So 2020, I think, is known for two things: COVID and Black Lives Matter. So tell me, what is Black Lives Matter to you? Why is it important, or is it important?
Black Lives Matter for me was very important for this specific reason, is that for 7 years I've been telling people, when I started doing Black History Month, I wanted it to be, it was a focus on British Black history, that's number one. And secondly, I wanted to create spaces whereby people can engage in a sort of softly way with conversation that sometimes can be difficult, but as well be open to listening. And for a long time, what I've been told is that, oh, actually, there's no racism here. And for me, BLM, and especially the event that we hosted in Cheltenham, was a really good opportunity, not for me to talk, but for the young people who have grown here to speak and share about the racism that they've experienced in the town, in the schools. And, you know, nothing else can beat that. And for me, that has been the most important thing that's happened, you know, with the Black Lives Matter event. And the openness, what I found after that is that people are now open to have conversations about race. And this is, everybody is willing to have this conversation. And for me, that is a great opportunity for us to change the narrative for the community and for the next generation, to ensure that this such a thing, or, you know, we find better tools to deal with the issues of race. We empower our young people to hold people accountable when they experience race, so that even those who are allies and don't know can learn.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And okay, so kind of one other big question from me is, we see systemic inequalities in everywhere: health, social care, education, employment, police, justice system. Kind of all of these things we as British people hold so dearly, as they're so important. You know, we're kind of pillars in the world in the way that our justice system works and our education system works and the NHS. But we know that they are all in some way, shape or form prejudice against Black people. So how do we even up that gap? How do we close up that gap? How do we get better equality and equity in the UK?
And for me, that comes back to the diversity and inclusion, and who is actually delivering the training for the organization, and how, because from me, just looking outside, I think our institutions are great. And they were institutions that were set up how many years ago, but they were never set up for diverse communities. And and for that reason, when new policies are introduced, they're never introduced if the diverse communities are now around the table to advise, to give, you know, to give that different perspective. Then there's no shift in the needs of the diverse community. You don't hear these voices. And it's very important that when institutions say, oh, this organization qualifies to deliver a diversity and inclusion training, they really, you know, think, what sort of training is it? Cultural diversity. I mean, I've heard about is it only 10%? This is was done by Minds. 10% of people who's gone through the mental health system from the BEM community or Black community did say that it was that their experience was catered, could cater for them, but the rest of the people just said there was nothing that catered for their, you know, their cultural side, that included their cultural side of things. So how can you be sort of treating somebody and not even understanding that aspect of it. Our institution falls short and fail a lot of people in that way because of lack of understanding. Just one system doesn't fit all. When you think about when you think about employment, the education system, health, that most diverse communities is not equal. So how can a policy that's been introduced be equal to all?
Yeah, kind of backgrounds, cultures, all of those things play a part in, if we're looking at mental health, then recovery from illness and prevention of illness, right?
Or even just how did that person get to that stage?
Yeah.
How did that person, and what information are you getting from that person that makes you conclude that that's where they are? Until, it's fair enough to say, oh, what is your background? But if you can go far 2-3 generations, if somebody's, let's say my family is from Africa, if they can go back to that, what information are they're basing my experience on?
Yeah, it's interesting. So Florence, we've been talking for about 35 minutes now, and I said we'd only be half an hour, so apologies. So as this is a joint kind of a discussion, I think, because we're kind of sharing this Black History Month discussion between us at Bath Spa and you guys at Black History Month Gloucestershire. You added some questions onto the sheet, onto our shared kind of question document. So were there one or two things that you wanted to ask specifically of me?
Yeah, I just, because it's for me, as I mentioned before, earlier on, when there's this, I have my kids who are now the first generation in this country and their experiences, and I've always I just wondered, so how has that, especially, I also have nephews who are mixed heritage, so how has that affected your view of how you experience life, Jermaine?
Yeah, so I guess kind of being mixed race and having black parent, white parent, black family, white family is growing up in London anyway, it's so diverse that it didn't really occur to me that race was a thing that needed to be discussed or thought about until I was kind of, I don't know, 14, 15, 16. My grandparents, who I stayed with a lot when I was young, would always say to me, on my dad's side, so the black side, would always say to me, like, you've got to stay out of trouble. If you want to do well, you're probably going to have to work harder than a white person who does, who has the same kind of ability as you. You're going to have to work harder than them to get as far as they do. But it didn't really register with me. But when I kind of got into my teens, I guess there's an issue in terms of you don't really know where to identify. So I was brought up mostly by my mum. My mum's white, and her side of the family is white. So do you identify as a white person, or do you identify as everybody else in society sees you as a black person, or is there something in between as a mixed race person, or is there nothing? And I think it took years to work out where I felt my ethnicity lay, and now is strongly as a mixed race person. I'm as proud of my black side of my family as I'm my white family and white side, and vice versa. But what it does to affect my view on Black Lives Matter, for example, is I think, or I'd like to think, irrespective of my mixed heritage background, I would want to work hard to at least make more people aware of the difficulties that Black people face in this country, because all I've wanted to do from a young age is to support people and help make a difference. And so whether that was originally going into medicine, that's what I wanted to do, to try and support people when I was younger, and then going into academia and my research on kind of mental health and well-being. That's the thing that I want to do, is to try and make a difference. And so I think irrespective of my background, I would like to think that I would still be kind of talking about and shouting about and discussing things like Black Lives Matter and inequality, systemic inequality in the UK. Yeah.
That's great, Jermaine. That's great. And when is it that you felt the shift that you are comfortable with yourself?
Oh, it took a long time, Florence. It took years and years. Because as I said, outside of your family and your friends,
yeah,
the one drop rule, as they say in the States, really does apply. So everybody sees you if you have skin color like mine, which is obviously a lot lighter than yours, a lot lighter than my dad's. Everybody sees you as a Black person.
Yeah.
And so for years, you're treated as a Black person, but you know that you have white heritage and white family and you're proud of that. But it's really hard to kind of to put the two together. So I think it was probably only in the last 7 or 8 years. I was listening to Professor Chris Jackson, who's doing the Christmas lectures this year, the first Black person to do the Christmas lectures. And he said that kind of his Blackness only really hit him like a decade ago when he was in his mid-30s. And, you know, I think it was a bit earlier than that for me, so maybe kind of mid to late 20s. But yeah, I mean, before that, just a lack of understanding where I fit and where my ethnicity fit was a difficult thing to overcome.
So if you're talking to your 12-year self, let's say a 12-year, mixed race person's watching this, what would you tell them?
I would tell them to try and talk to somebody with a background similar to theirs, somebody who's been through that. So if there was a 12-year-old who kind of could be mentored by somebody who was a bit older, so in their mid-20s, early 30s, something like that, just to talk about these things about race and let them have somebody to bounce their confusion off and their difficulties off, that would be really useful. But if I was talking to my 12-year-old self now, I would kind of say, with respect to race and ethnicity, it's going to take time to know and understand how you feel about these things, and that's fine, you know, because it can lead to anxiety and it can lead to feeling a discomfort when you don't know how you feel. But actually, it's okay to feel that way, and I think it just takes time to realize where you fit and where your ethnicity fits with you.
But because I'm working on a sort of a youth program now at the moment, and those are the issues that I want young people to come together and be able to have a space whereby they can share this experience. So you mentioned about mentoring. So are you saying that, being in an environment whereby you can share what you're feeling with people, you can have mentors who will be able to listen to what your experiences are, would support somebody's experience?
I think so. And even if it doesn't support their experience, at least it supports them in knowing that it's okay to not know. Like, it's okay to have that uncertainty, and, don't kind of let it affect you. Don't let it make you feel uncomfortable in any situation, because if you think that everybody sees you as a Black person, then you're going to feel uncomfortable when you walk into white only spaces. But if then kind of Black people see you as a mixed race person with lighter skin, are you going to feel less comfortable walking into Black only spaces? Kind of, I guess it would kind of be like, just that the discomfort is fine. Just don't let it affect you and your behaviors. And just having a mentor who can listen and reflect on that, I think, would be really useful for young people.
Thank you. Yeah. Sorry, my thing is always just think, so long as I'm true to myself, then actually nothing else matters. If I get it wrong, then I can say, okay, I learned from that. But otherwise, being true to yourself is something, is a good position to start from.
Yeah. But I guess it's hard as a young person to realize that, right? And so
Yeah, I know.
again, kind of having somebody there that
Mm,
isn't your grandparent
mm,
to talk to about that stuff would be useful, I think.
yeah. Well,
Um,
thank you.
yeah,
Mm.
cool. Florence, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Jermaine. We can take this conversation.
Yeah, we could talk forever, but it's been 45 minutes, and I think that's plenty
That's
of time on a Sunday afternoon. Yeah,
that's more than it. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
we'll catch up soon. Okay,
Okay. Thank you.
bye.
Bye. Bye.